Needed more low-level flights because they wanted to see mainly if those launching pads in Cuba had become close to or have been operational. So these flights are going to be low-level on the deck to try to get information on the missiles. They're even going to be different than the original one they had, in which they found out there were missiles in Cuba. These are going to be much more on the deck because they want to get a close-up of these launching pads. Now, these flights, again, were done to make sure that the missile launching pads had not become operational. Now, what would be the concern the military would have on these low-level flights? What do you think they're concerned about when they go into these low-level flights? What? Go. The ship, these planes they think are going to be fired upon, and so the military had to make preparations in case the pilots were shot at. Okay? So it's kind of a risky deal. We're going to send these. Do we need these low-level flights? Are they necessary? The military asking for them legitimately? Absolutely. But the risk is that the chances of these pilots being fired on are good. And so the military had to make preparations in case their pilots were fired upon. Well, when Kennedy listened to this, he allowed the surveillance and gave permission for those low-level flights. Now, this made Kenneth O'Donnell very uncomfortable. Now, I want you to think about out of the boxes. I'd be impressed if you knew this, but why would Kenneth O'Donnell be uncomfortable with Kennedy's approval of these low-level flights? Think about kind of what we talked about. Why would Kenneth O'Donnell become uncomfortable? His job is to protect the president and keep him out of trouble, right? Okay, so why would he be uncomfortable with these low-level flights?
Because if somebody shot at you, then you'd probably be obligated to return fire.
Absolutely. If these pilots are shot at, those military personnel are going to want retaliation, and that could lead to what? War. So basically, O'Donnell believed that the military, they wanted to go in there and kick ass, didn't they? I mean, they wanted to. They wanted to airstrike and invade. They wanted to get her done. And O'Donnell feels like the military's setting up the president because he knows that if they have to retaliate on these pilots that are shot at, that's going to result in airstrikes followed by invasion. And that's what they're kind of trying to avoid by the blockade. So there's not much question that if these planes go over Cuba, they're going to be fired upon. No doubt about it. And why would they be fired upon? Why are the Cubans going to fire upon?
Because they don't want us to cross their line.
Well, they don't want that, but how do they know whether we're carrying cameras or missiles? How do they know that? Because they know we know now, right? Kennedy got on national television and told the world that we know there's missiles in Cuba. So these planes come over on the deck. How do the Cubans know whether they're going to be carrying cameras or missiles, right? So if the planes are fired upon, which you know they're going to be, the military is going to retaliate to protect the pilots. And Kennedy said, or O'Donnell said to Kennedy, you know these planes are going to be shot at. And they got in a little bit of a discussion. And the president argued with O'Donnell. He says, well, you know that I have a responsibility to protect these pilots. You know we got to have the flights. What do you want me to do? So they're stuck in a catch-22. So here's what Kenneth O'Donnell does. He excused himself from talking to the president, and he called Commander William B. Ecker directly. It was on your ID sheet. O'Donnell leaves the discussion with the president, knowing the president's getting set up. We're going to have a problem here. If they take these low-level flights and they get shot at, they've ruined every philosophy they've had on the blockade because they're going to do airstrikes and invade if these pilots are shot at in retaliation. No question. So O'Donnell excused himself from the president and he calls Commander William B. Ecker. Why would he call Commander William B. Ecker? Because he's one of two pilots that's going to be doing what? The low-level flights. So he calls one of the commanding officer of the low-level flight U-2 planes because he's one that's going to be flying. And he got on the phone with Ecker, and I'll let you see it yourself on the video later, but he basically said, I'm here to pass an order on from the president. So O'Donnell calls William B. Ecker, gets him on the phone, and he says, I'm here to pass an order on from the president. Here was the order. Not to get shot down. That was the order that O'Donnell passed on from President Kennedy to Commander William B. Eckert.
Was that
Well, what-
a real message? Or
That's what he said. Not to get shot down.
But was Kenneth actually quoting what
No,
President
he didn't even talk to the president. He just said, I'm passing the word on to the president, not to get shot down. Of course, O'Donnell is sitting there on the phone, and of course, Ecker is thinking, this is a weird phone call. Well, sir, I'm not sure I can guarantee not to get shot, you know. And O'Donnell went on to explain that if he were shot at, then the president would be forced to protect him, possibly with the bomb. And he just went way ahead by basically stating, if you get shot at and we have to retaliate, it's going to lead to possibly a nuclear weapon. So when Ecker kind of went back and forth and said not to get shot down, Ecker kind of looked, on the phone, goes, sir, I can't guarantee that. And he goes, well, he says, if you get shot at, we're going to have to protect you, possibly with the bomb. And then he said this to Ecker, just listen to this quote, he said, now I've known the man for 15 years. The problem is he will protect you. So I am asking, don't make him protect you. Don't get shot at. That was the order he gave me. Okay? So, Ecker takes another pilot, Lieutenant Bruce Wellamy, and they take off on their low-level flight. So Ecker takes another pilot with him. It's a two-plane mission. He takes Lieutenant Bruce Wellamy, and they do their mission. They go get the pictures. And because O'Donnell told him not to get shot at, I suppose you think that he didn't get shot at. Just worked out perfect. Somehow he mysteriously got the Cubans and the Soviets on the ground in Cuba not to shoot at him. Actually, they completed their mission successfully and were shot at like you couldn't believe. Had all kinds of bullet holes in their airplane when they landed. So during the successful mission, both Ecker and Lieutenant Bruce Wellamy were heavily fired upon. Now tell me if this makes you think the military was setting up the president. As soon as he landed, Ecker was asked by his superior officers to deliver the film personally to the Pentagon. That never happens. A pilot never personally delivers the film to the Pentagon. So after this successful flight, Commander Ecker was asked by his superior officers to deliver the film personally to the Pentagon. What do you think Ecker did? Good patriot. What did Ecker do when he was given that message? He has to do it, right? He gets orders from his superior officers to deliver the film personally. That never happened. So what did Ecker do? What was his next step? Before he delivered the film personally to the Pentagon, what did he do?
He developed it?
No, he couldn't do that.
Called.
He called Kenneth O'Donnell. He said, hey, I don't know what's up here, but I've been asked to deliver this film personally to the Pentagon. So that was good sense on Eckert's part. He called Kenneth O'Donnell at the White House and informed him of his order to report. What do you think O'Donnell did when he got that information? He said to him again, Commander Eckert, I know this goes against everything you've been taught as a military officer, but I can't emphasize enough the importance of not being shot at when you're asked by your superiors. Because he knows that's what they're going to ask him. First thing they're going to ask him when he hands him the film is, were you shot at? Because these guys want to airstrikes, they want to invade, they want to kick ass and take names. Okay? And so O'Donnell says to Eckert when he calls, he says, I know this goes against everything you've probably ever been taught in officer training, so to speak. But I can't tell you how important it is that you were not shot at during that mission. Okay? What do you do if you're Eckert? So, Eckert hangs up the phone, personally delivers the film to the Pentagon. He walks in the door, and who's the first person to talk to him, you guess? Very good, General LeMay. He barely walks in the door, and he's confronted by General LeMay. And this is what General LeMay said to Eckert. He said, quote, son, I want to know just one thing. Those bastards shoot as much as a BB gun at you? That's the first thing LeMay said to Eckert. Quote, son, I want to know just one thing. Those bastards shoot as much as a BB gun at you. You know what Eckert's response was?
Nope.
He wouldn't lie to the superior officer. He says, quote, "It was a cakewalk, sir. It was a cakewalk, sir." That's how he responded. Did he lie? That's what he did. I'm not kidding. He said, "It was a cakewalk, sir." So, we get through that one. So back at the White House, Kennedy is having a conversation with Secretary of State Dean Rusk. So back at the White House, while this is going on and O'Donnell's putting out fires like you can't believe, the President is meeting with Secretary of State Dean Rusk. Now, do you remember the importance of calling it a quarantine instead of a blockade because he didn't want it to be assumed as an act of war? Why? Because we wanted support from other countries. And that's why Bobby Kennedy didn't really want to bomb Cuba and then invade, because it looked like a big country picking on a little country. Well, the organization that they wanted support from on the quarantine that they just put in was the Organization of American States, which is on your ID sheet. And what was happening is President Kennedy was visiting with Secretary of State Dean Rusk and letting him know that a vote was being taken on the approval or disapproval of the quarantine line by the Organization of American States. Now remember, we're still on what day? Tuesday. So back at the White House, President Kennedy is speaking to Secretary of State Dean Rusk about a vote that was going to be conducted by the Organization of American States. And they're going to be voting on support or non-support of the United States' quarantine line into Cuba. And what Kennedy's telling Rusk is you need to ensure me a unanimous vote in support of that. You need to go there and lobby like crazy and get every single delegate in the Organization of American States to support the quarantine. That's what unanimous is. Everybody votes for it. He wants a 100% unanimous vote in support of the quarantine, and he wants Rusk to make sure it happens. Because what hasn't he done yet? He has not officially signed the quarantine into law. He's made it clear Monday night that that will start. Okay, but these ships are too far out to worry about it yet. So he hasn't signed it into law yet. We'll talk about that. And before he signs it into law, what does he want? Full support of the Organization of American States. Well, Rusk is just perplexed. He said, "President, never in the history of this world have we ever had a unanimous vote on anything among the members of the Organization of American States. You're asking me to do something that's impossible." Kennedy would not take that. He said, "You get a unanimous vote, Dean, and I mean it," and sent him on his way. So Kennedy's waiting to get the response back from Rusk on that vote before he puts this quarantine into law. Because it's really not into effect yet, right? Because we're still on Tuesday. He announced it Monday. We're talking Tuesday. The ships still are way off. We're not worried about it. We're still making preparations. Well, I'll be damned if Rusk doesn't call the President and say that he got the unanimous vote. That evening, he called the President and said, we got a unanimous vote of support. Which was almost impossible to do. But they did. And with that news, Kennedy signed what was known as Proclamation 3504. And that's a presidential executive decision. A proclamation is something the President only can do. So the vote came back unanimous, and that evening, President Kennedy signed Proclamation 3504. What's that number mean? 3,504th proclamation in the history of our country that's put out by a president. Okay? What do you think that Proclamation 3504 officially did? Authorized what? The quarantine of Cuba. And that happened at 7:06 p.m. on Tuesday evening is when it was official that we had a quarantine on the island of Cuba. So the vote came back unanimous from the Organization of American States that evening. When Kennedy got that news, he signed Proclamation 3504, which officially authorized the naval quarantine of Cuba that evening at 7:06 p.m. It was scheduled to go into effect officially at 10 a.m. the next morning. Okay, so Kennedy signs the Proclamation 3504 at 7:06 p.m. on Tuesday evening, which officially authorizes the naval quarantine. And the proclamation states that the quarantine would officially go into effect at 10 a.m. the next morning, Wednesday, October 24th. Okay, so we are legal and ready to roll. Well, a couple things happened to put more pressure on Kennedy at this point. First of all, what might you guess they developed? Those pictures that Eckert took. And those pictures showed that the missile launching pads were very close to readiness. They could see them very clearly. What's that? Yeah, it was on Tuesday night. But Kennedy gets more bad news that night. First of all, they developed those photographs. And it showed that those missile launching pads were near operation, close. And it also, just so you know, because they went low level, they could see them very clearly. No doubt this is a missile launching pad, and it's about ready to go. So that's the first bad news he got to put more pressure on him, that the additional photographs taken by Commander Ecker and Lieutenant Wilhelmy showed the missile launching pads clearly defined and very close to readiness. The second thing that really irritated him was we would regularly schedule hydrogen bomb tests. That's what we did in the Cold War. We haven't scheduled. We're going to test a hydrogen bomb in the desert of New Mexico on this date, whatever. Well, Kennedy wasn't thinking about all of that, and a regularly scheduled hydrogen bomb test was initiated by the military that day, which made him very angry because he would think that common sense would tell the military in a time of crisis like this probably wouldn't be the time to test a hydrogen bomb because who might take that the wrong way? The Soviet Union for sure. So he's all upset about that, and that puts more pressure on him. Now, even though this hydrogen bomb test was routine, the timing was horribly uncomfortable considering the circumstances that we're in. He just shaking his head thinking, are you kidding me? But these are examples of how the military, what they want to do. They wanted to airstrike and invade. They thought he was absolutely a chicken on this blockade. They hated it, okay? But he's trying to save the country a lot of trouble. So that ends Tuesday, October 23rd. Kind of a tough, weird day there. Now, Wednesday, October 24th, according to historians, is the most trying day of the crisis. Most pressure-packed. Closest we come to war up to that point. But what happens at 10 o'clock in the morning this day? Quarantine goes into effect, and these ships are getting closer and closer and closer to that quarantine line. Now, did Kennedy really trust the military with all the decisions at the Pentagon? No. So who did he send over there to make sure everything went right that had some authority? Kenneth O'Donnell has no authority. So who's he send over there to make sure his orders are followed? Especially the no firing upon ships without his explicit concern. His brother is a good guess too, not qualified. Who did he qualify?
McNamara.
Secretary of State McNamara. Very good. So according to historians, this day proved to be the most trying day in the crisis. And President Kennedy was so worried about the lines of communication, he sent Secretary of Defense McNamara directly to the Pentagon so he could directly communicate with him. Kind of reminds me of the coach and the quarterback in the NFL with that microphone in their helmet. They're going to make sure they can communicate with the guy making the decisions. And Kennedy wanted to make sure that he knew exactly what was going on at the Pentagon and that everything that he wanted to happen happened. So he sent Secretary of Defense McNamara, who is on his side, by the way. He's not siding with these military guys, right? Even though he's the Secretary of Defense, he's agreeing with what Kennedy's doing. So he sends him there so he can directly communicate. Well, shortly before 10 a.m., before that quarantine line went into effect, McNamara reported from the Pentagon to XCOM, because Kennedy's back in the cabinet room with XCOM, and McNamara's at the Pentagon, okay? And they're talking back and forth, and McNamara reports from the Pentagon to XCOM just before 10 a.m. the positions of what? Those Soviet ships that are bound for Cuba. He gives them the exact location where these 25 Soviet merchant ships are. But it's shortly before 10 o'clock. They haven't initiated this yet. So he informed the committee that the Soviet ships were still continuing toward the quarantine line. So a little bit before 10 that morning, again, McNamara reports, so the president knows exactly, and so does XCOM, where those Soviet ships are in relationship to that quarantine line. Well, at 10 a.m., the president announces officially to the Pentagon that the quarantine line is in effect, and the rules of engagement are in effect that they talked about. So it's a waiting game now. Starts at 10 o'clock, and what are they waiting for? They're waiting for those Soviet ships to see what they're going to do. Okay? Talk about pressure. So at 10 a.m., President Kennedy announces to the Pentagon that the quarantine line was officially in effect, and in essence, all the Pentagon does is they inform all of the ships out in that quarantine area that we're good to go here. Rules of engagement are in place. Okay, and here come the ships. Well, the first two ships that were sighted were the Gagarin and the Kimhoffs, with both that are on your ID sheet. And they were sighted shortly after 10 a.m. And Secretary of Defense McNamara announced back to the White House when the first two Soviet ships were within just a few miles of the quarantine line. And those first two ships were the Gagarin and the Kimhoffs. That Gagarin ring a bell? Yeah, the astronaut, or the cosmonaut. They named the ship after it. So, again, shortly after 10 a.m., Secretary of Defense announces back to the cabinet room, to the President and XCOM, the first two Soviet ships that were within just a few miles